And Jack has an interesting story to tell, which starts in England. I am going to ask him some questions, and then we will go onward. But before that, something I want to remind you. Normally we have this program on the second and fourth Mondays in this room. However, the next time would be the fourth Monday, and we are not having a program that night. So the next program will be October 10th. We're skipping one, okay?
But we do have What's in the Bag
next
week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which other thing do we have coming?
Well, that's it. Well,
Okay.
tomorrow we have Jeopardy, then What's in the Bag.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You heard Julian, and certainly if anyone knows, she knows what's going on. We do have a few openings. I have the sign-up sheet here. It'll be available afterwards to sign up. Otherwise, it's in the mail room. And I thank those of you who have signed up, and we've met and discussed plans for you telling your story. Believe it or not, each one of you has a story that would be interesting. So don't be shy. We're family here. Okay, now I'd like to start. Jack, you were born where?
In Leeds, England.
In Leeds, England. Was your family living there a long time, your parents?
Well, yes.
In other words, were they always in England? I mean, were they born there?
My parents, my grandparents on my mother's side came from Russia, and on my father's side they came from Lithuania.
Okay, so they were European
Jews.
Yes. Did when they came to England, did they come for to be involved in a certain profession, or were they just wanting to leave where they were living?
Well, they needed to get out of Russia.
Because of the conditions?
Because of the conditions and the anti-Semitism.
So, settled in England, you have two brothers. Who is the oldest?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yeah, and my next brother is 10 years younger than me, and my youngest brother is 15 years younger.
So you were truly a big brother.
Yeah.
You were an older brother and a big brother. There's quite a spread. And where are both of them now?
Well, my middle brother is in Edinburgh, where although I was born in England in Leeds, we moved just before World War II to Edinburgh in Scotland, and that's where I grew up.
I see, and your brothers.
And my brothers, yeah.
I see,
and we lived there during World War II.
Because it was safer.
Well, it wasn't that safe.
No.
I mean, every night I used to listen to the sound of German bombers flying over Edinburgh on the way to bomb the docks on the west coast near Glasgow, where the least land of foods and things like that arrived from the United States. And then I would hear the planes as they flew back to Germany, and they were a bit not so regular.
How old were you then?
I must have, let's see, the war started when I was 6.
Well, you were little. You were young.
Yeah, but
oh my goodness! So
I developed. It used to be the case in those years that you could get a deck of cards, but the cards had all kinds of things you could do with them and write on them, and I developed a way to use cards to nail down the different kinds of German planes that flew over Edinburgh.
Oh, when you were very young?
Yeah.
You were doing this?
Yeah.
I see.
But I mean, we were very lucky in Edinburgh because the German bombers always flew over Edinburgh and never dropped any bombs. But my parents were big gamblers in those days, and one time they took me to a stadium for some game or other, greyhound racing. And all of a sudden, this was during the war, all of a sudden there was a big roar, and a German bomber flew very low over the field.
Oh my goodness.
And it was followed by 2 Spitfires.
Oh.
And one of the bookies who stood up and immediately said 6-1 over the little ones. And sure enough, this German bomber was the only bomber shot down over Edinburgh, and it crash landed on the beach just near where we were.
Oh my, what an experience for a young child to see.
Oh, I stood up and watched,
Ah,
because I had learned with a deck of cards with planes on them to recognize all these bombers and
I
fighters.
see.
And
You were identifying them.
Yeah,
You knew
yeah.
what they were. Interesting. Now, when you were in school there, you used the term ducks, not D-U-C-K-S, ducks.
That means the top student.
Right, and I wasn't sure, so I Googled it, and sure enough, even Mr. Google knew that. That it could indicate the top student in the school and
Yeah.
or in the class,
Yeah.
whatever. How was that determined? Is it by testing?
Testing.
It wasn't subjective then, it
No,
was
it's
objective.
Testing, yeah.
Uh-huh, okay.
And my parents decided that the school I was in, which was just a regular school, wasn't good enough. So they took me to a school that was 250 years old.
Is that the George Heriot's?
George Heriot School, and Heriot's was a person who the King of Scotland was close to.
Oh, okay.
And so the school was 250 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I passed an exam, and the school took me in, and I ended up being the top student in the school.
I'm very surprised. Shocking.
When I graduated from there.
Wonderful.
And then I went to Edinburgh University, but I was bored there.
What was your major?
Mathematics and physics and chemistry.
The light stuff, the easy stuff.
The easy stuff, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, your parents, were they in the academic world?
No.
What did your parents?
My father was a baker, and my mother was a homebody. But she had a habit of getting my report cards when I got them from school,
Mm-hmm.
and if I got less than 98% on anything, she got upset with me.
Oh, okay. Well, she evidently felt you could do it, and she wanted you.
And then they decided that the school I was going to wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
they took me to a school that was 200 years
That was the
old.
George Heriot School.
George Heriot School, yeah.
But I remember you telling me something about being kind of a curious little boy, and that you went somewhere, and I don't know, was it a fire engine that you saw, or kind of a
I had a little model car,
car? Oh, it was a car.
and I wanted to to take it up to where the real cars were. So I walked up the road away from the house that I lived in. I was probably about 5 years old.
Oh, boy.
And anyway, my mother got upset and she sent a policeman after me, and he made me walk back down away from the main street where all the cars were. And so I never got a chance to look at all the cars. And so, but anyway, I remember that very vividly, that I had to go with a policeman back home.
So were you the only one in your family at the age of 5 that had a run-in with the police?
Yes.
Okay, we'll remember that, Jack.
And any time I had a school report, and I scored less than 98%, my mother would get upset with me.
She knew you could do it. She knew that. Now, what happened? Did you go to being Jewish? Did you go to Hebrew school?
Yes, but I argued all the time with the rabbi.
What did you argue about?
Everything.
Oh.
And he was on the verge of kicking me out many times, but since I was always the top student in the class, he let me stay.
I see.
And an interesting thing happened when we first came here. There was an English professor at the University of Chicago who it turned out was the son of the rabbi.
Oh, did he remember the name?
Yes, he did.
Oh my goodness. See, my mother used to say that your name is the most valuable thing you have, so be sure to take good care of it. Well, okay, but he probably didn't know about your run-in with the police, so you were okay.
Right.
Yeah. So when did you go back to England?
When did we go back?
According to what you told me, in 1962.
Okay, from Boston to London.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
That we had skipped over too much. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay. So you went to Edinburgh, then you went to the Imperial College, and then you went to
MIT.
Whoa. Tell us about MIT.
Well, this was, of course, after the war and everything. When did we go?
58.
1958. I got a fellowship from an English company that was interested in artificial intelligence and stuff like that. In the very early days.
When you say artificial intelligence, is it what we lay people know as what computers do?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I have to translate it so that I understand it.
Yeah.
Okay.
When did you marry what's her name?
We're not there
I
yet.
didn't ask you to participate. Whenever you want to take over, Ray, you're welcome to do it. I remember you're telling about being invited to give a lecture at the Museum of Science and Industry, and
That was
as a result of that, some very good things happened, correct?
Yeah. Well, that was so like I say, I did all right when I was at school, but then at university in Edinburgh in Scotland, I found myself being bored by the teachers in those days.
So that's why you went to the Imperial College?
So in the end, I ended up getting a job at what was then a very novel place where people did mathematics for what was going on in the brain and in all kinds of stuff. And I was asked to take a device that two of my teachers had invented all the way to Imperial College in London. where I met a man called Arthur Porter. He was a professor, and also a person called Gabor, Dennis Gabor, who was a Hungarian who he wasn't a professor then, but he was just below being a professor. And he and I got along very well. And so the company I worked for at the time let me stay at the Imperial College, which it was, for a year. And in that time, I learned a lot of stuff from Gabor.
I see. Now this was not through the college. This was a separate company.
No, this was he was at Imperial College.
Oh, but
He wasn't a professor, but he was almost a professor.
I see. I thought you mentioned something about the company you worked for that allowed you to do this work.
That's right. It was one of the early companies that was interested in machine learning and all those kinds of things, just coming in. This was after the war, and it was after the work of Turing, for example.
Yes, well, it was very special.
Turing was very special. I never met Turing, but I met several people that had worked for Turing during the war when they cracked the German codes all the time.
Does anyone, I can't think of it off the top of my head, know the name of the movie about him? That's it.
The Imitation Game, yes.
Yeah. I couldn't remember what it was.
Well, I knew quite well about 3 of the people who worked with Turing on decoding the German codes.
Yeah, well, I want to get to something that I think is very surprising. Getting back to the Museum of Science and Industry, where you gave a lecture, and then afterwards you were approached by the U.S. Navy.
Yeah. So anyway, I got a scholarship to go to MIT from England, from a company there that thought.
I see.
And one day I was invited to go with 2 people, one of my mentors, to give a lecture in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry. And I gave a lecture there, and that evening across the road in the hotel, which is now part of the University of Chicago, there was a knock on the door, and there were 2 men of short stature. They said, "We're from the U.S. Navy. Would you like a grant?" It's true.
Has anyone heard of anything like being approached that we want to give you a grant?
Anyway, I said, I'm going back to England, but if you want to give me a grant, that would be nice. And they said, well, the U.S. Navy, we're from the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy has people in London. They can take care of you. And so they gave me a grant, and they paid me basically the salary of a full professor.
And for how many years was this grant?
10 years.
Oh my God.
I had the grant when I was asked if I would like to go to the University of Chicago and take charge of something there.
So when you received this grant, I'm asking you because in my other life, one of the things I did was grant writing for a not-for-profit. And I know how difficult it is to get money. And all the various things you have to go through to prove to whoever you're asking for this money and how it's going to benefit people and it's going to do this, and then being, after maybe 6 months of working on it, being turned down. So when you tell me that someone knocks on your door and says, do you want it? That is amazing. Now, did you have to provide some kind of a goal, a hypothesis of what you're going to research or do?
No. They heard me give a talk, and on the basis of the talk I gave, they offered me a grant.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. Let's try to switch roles. Let's say you were these people from the Navy, and you had gone to this lecture, you had heard this professor speak and tell about this. Would you have just handed him carte blanche, just like that?
No way.
But you got it. Okay. All right. We won't fight that.
So Julian and I got married, and we get.
No, we were married.
We were. But we ended up in the United States,
I see. Okay.
in Chicago.
All right.
No. Okay.
All right.
We've been in Boston.
Yeah. We spent the early part in when I was at MIT.
Okay. Well, good. Well, that especially since you felt that MIT was tremendous. I mean,
Well,
it must have been great years.
There were 4 people there. One of them was a man called Claude Shannon, and Shannon was the founder of information theory.
Information theory.
And another one was what's his name?
Along the same line, research in artificial intelligence, or was it more in brain theory?
It was artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And there were 2 people. One was a young guy who called Walter Pitts, and the other one was an older man who had been Warren McCulloch, and I ended up working in their group at MIT.
I see. So.
And it turned out that MIT was full of people who basically started the modern age. They're the ones who, MIT was the place where the modern age of computing and all that stuff all started at MIT.
I see. So did you take much of what you had been exposed to and learned? Did you then bring some of that to University of Chicago when you came here?
Yes, but in between I went back to England to Imperial College in London, and started to interact with a man from who had been he was a Hungarian, and Gabor his name was, but he was no relation to the Gabor sisters.
That may have been a taken name in Hollywood. I'm not sure.
But he was a fantastic scientist, and he had worked with for a time with Albert Einstein in Germany, and in fact Einstein and Gabor they got out of Germany when Hitler came to power, and Gabor ended up in London at Imperial College, and I met him when I first went down to Imperial College with a device that my boss had developed, and so I met Gabor, and he and I hit it off right away.
Great.
And he became my main mentor, Dennis Gabor.
So somewhere along the line, when we were talking prior to this, you mentioned some summers in Italy.
Yes, I got to know the head of a laboratory in Italy. Caianello, his name was, and he invited me to go and spend some time there. But before that, I was invited to a meeting in northern Italy, where there was a Rockefeller building on the banks of Lake Como in northern Italy. And there was a person there from the University of Chicago, and he asked me if I was interested in a job in Chicago, at the University of Chicago. So Julia and I decided that was a good idea, and so I ended up a professor at the University of Chicago on the basis of that meeting in northern Italy.
It sounds like you had a number of situations in your life that were kind of predestined, you know, that you met certain people and you connected with certain people that took you to the next level or the next location.
Well, I mean, the people who went to MIT or to Imperial College was full of people like that.
I see. That these were the people these were your people that you worked with and that you knew. That's fascinating.
Well, I was very lucky. I consider I retired about a year and a half ago. At one time, I went with Gabor to a meeting in France, and it turned out it was a meeting of lots of very distinguished scientists who decided each year who was a likely candidate for a Nobel Prize. So, and all of a sudden, I was asked to join this group.
Is it a committee that works on that?
It was a committee that worked each year to decide which people were in the running for a Nobel Prize.
Wow.
And I learned very quickly who was really good at these meetings and who wasn't so quite so good.
I see. Now, when someone, I'm trying to imagine. We have a scientist here who's done some amazing things. Okay, and do his people that he works with nominate him, or who nominates a person to even be considered for a Nobel Prize?
Usually people who've already gotten the Nobel Prize
I
are the ones
see.
who nominate people.
I see. So they kind of keep their finger, or keep their vision in the upcoming field, so that
And at any one of these meetings, it was very amusing. You'd always find people who didn't have the Nobel Prizes always sitting beside people who did have the Nobel Prizes, and talking to them all the time about how good they were.
Interesting. Seems to me that you received your PhD in a little different way than, most academics go to school and then they go to beyond, and then they do.
Well, I didn't have a PhD. When I was invited to go to the University of Chicago, so I took a week off, I wrote a paper, and I got a PhD.
It took him that long.
I'm not going to tell my grandson that story.
It's a true story.
But you've done the work at Imperial.
Yeah, I did. I had done all the work at Imperial College.
Okay. Looking back on your career, what would you say you're most proud of?
I don't know that I found myself with a whole group of very, very smart kids as my graduate students.
Oh, uh-huh.
And every one of them ended up being a professor somewhere else. And some of them are just amazingly clever. So I've been very pleased with all the students I've had over the years. I only had one student who I had to kick out of my group. It was a Russian who didn't understand the meaning of the word work.
Oh, okay, well,
But
that's unfortunate, because he could have gotten so much from...
I did actually, a few years ago, get invited to go back to MIT, and I was very tempted by that. But in the end, we stayed put.
Instead, you came to the Carrington, right?
Yeah, that's right. But,
well, I think the students that you mentored have now gone on and probably are mentoring their students.
Oh yeah, they're all
So
over the place.
you've touched the future,
I mean,
by the work you've done and the influence you've had.
Yeah, I had a fantastic Japanese student for quite a while, and we're still in close contact. I had very, very good students from England. I had very good students from the United States all over the place, and Australians and Indians and all kinds of people. I had a very good Indian student who worked with me on neural network problems, but then his uncle, still in India, got the Nobel Prize in economics. So he immediately asked me if he could switch to doing economics, because he knew I actually gave a course on the mathematics underlying economics for the math department, and so he did that, and he's doing very, very well now.
If you, I don't know how to put this, if you had the opportunity to achieve something or find something, what would you have liked to have explored and solved?
Well,
Do you have any thoughts along those lines?
well, basically all the stuff I worked on, I would have liked to have done better.
What about diseases of the brain?
Well, that's a tough one. That's a very tough one to work on, and I've been a consultant to a number of people who work on. I actually had I was in the math department when I first went to University of Chicago. I took on the job of looking after the people who were interested in the brain and what goes on in the brain and things like that, which is what I was working on anyway.
So was this a way of bringing the biology into the math?
No, it was a way of bringing the math into the
Oh,
biology.
okay, I had it the wrong way. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, it certainly.
And it turned out that the University of Chicago is a very, very good university. Particularly, some of the students there were amazingly good. I was very, very lucky. I had over the years many, many students, but almost every one of them was really good. And so I've always cherished the students I've had because they're so good at what they did.
Well, maybe there was a little inspiration there. You think?
And quite a few of them have made really big advances in artificial intelligence and all kinds of stuff like that.
So where are we now in artificial intelligence?
Well, it's still developing. By no means have we answered all the questions that are around, and it'll go on for hundreds of years yet. I mean, we're not anywhere close to really understanding how the brain works, for example, how human brains work. And there's a lot of work to be done on that, a lot of mathematical work. And it's amazing how smart a lot of people are these days, particularly in the United States.
Well, that's good to hear.
The U.S. has some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, particularly the physicists, most of whom are on the West Coast, but some of them are just, there's one person that I think is the smartest person I've ever gotten to know, and that was a man called Richard Feynman.
That's history.
It's history now, but Feynman was probably the smartest scientist I ever met in my life, and he was very involved in the developments of the atomic bomb, even though he was very young at the time. But Feynman was really good, and he had a colleague who was a rival. Who was also in the same class. They unbelievably smart people on the west coast of the United States. There's a whole bunch of scientists there who are just out of this world, basically.
Well, good. We need all of them. I'm going to switch the area of interest a little bit because of something you told me. You did some work in the mathematics of the stock market.
Oh,
Is that correct?
Very little.
Very little.
Yeah.
That was what, option pricing?
Yeah, things like that.
I see.
So I used to teach a course for the math department on economics.
I see.
The mathematics behind economics. So.
I thought maybe you'd give me some tips. We need it now with the stock market, anything to help. I'm full of questions, but I don't want to keep others from asking. First, I want to thank you for sharing your amazing life. We couldn't even begin to touch what you've done and the people that you've known and the experiences that you've had. But since we're limited to an hour, we have to stay within those confines. I'd like to open it up for questions, and if you don't have any, I sure do. How about some questions? Yes, Clara.
I was just wondering what his PhD work was in, if I would even understand, but I'd like to know.
What was your PhD in?
Electrical engineering.
Okay, so we think we know what that is. Electrical engineering in the brain?
Well, I used what I had learned to start thinking about what goes on in the brain.
Oh my.
And did you do some work on hallucinations?
Yeah, I did a lot of work on hallucinations. And
That are hallucinations that are chemically caused, or are these, I don't know if there's such a thing as an original hallucination, natural hallucination.
well, there are natural hallucinations, but most of them are things that are produced by people who take certain chemicals.
Okay, so when you were studying this, were you looking at a brain scan while this was happening, or how do you know what's going on in the brain?
Well, it's not so easy to.
I'm asking like I would understand. Yeah. Okay, we'll let that go because I think
What
I have more
happens?
questions.
What happens in the brain is that if you take something that will affect the way in which the brain operates, you can immediately get all kinds of responses to various ordinary things going on that aren't normal at all. And that's what happens when people take hallucinogens. They change completely the way the brain operates, and they produce people who have all kinds of problems with trying to understand what's going on in the world around them. And
Is that observed by seeing what's happening in the brain? I mean, actually seeing pictures of it, or their behavior?
No, it's behavior.
Behavior.
It's
Okay.
behavior. And
Okay.
a lot of people will behave in very unnormal ways if they take hallucinogens.
So, Jack, what's your opinion of all the talk in the early drug-taking days of Timothy Leary and LSD and the hallucinations?
Well, I think they were messing around with their brains in ways which were definitely not healthy. They weren't lethal, but they were definitely interfering with the normal way in which the brain behaves. So there's a lot of people who like to take things that produce hallucinations, and in general, it's I think it's dangerous to take stuff like that unless you know what you're doing with them.
Now with the MRI, are we not able to watch what's happening in the brain when certain things are either sound or medicines are given?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. It is possible to learn quite a lot from doing stuff like that. But it's early days yet. There's not enough understood about how the brain works yet. And I've worked on this stuff for 50 years now, but it's not easy to make progress in getting a scientific understanding of what goes on when people take hallucinatory substances.
I would like to tell you a little story. My husband was the director of the Weizmann Center at the University of Wisconsin, and the Dalai Lama came there, and he and some of his followers had MRIs done while they were in a meditative state to see what happened to their brain, which I cannot remember the results, but it was extremely interesting.
Well, it is interesting, but the question is, does it help people, or does it actually screw up their brains?
Well, I don't think it screwed up their brain. I think it just gave them gave the scientists a lot of information.
He's talking about meditation, not hallucination.
Yeah.
I mean, not like drugs, right? You're talking about meditation?
Pardon? They were not given a medicine.
No, you're talking about meditation. Meditation.
Yes, and how they go into meditation. What happens to the brain when they are meditating? They did that while they were having an MRI done. I just wanted to tell you that little story.
Well, I for a time I used to think about hallucinations and what they do to the brain and things like that. But I got sidetracked into other things. Yes.
Now you're talking about drug-induced meditations. How about normal one, hallucinating on a normal level? Is that different than drug-induced?
It is a bit, yeah. Drug-induced things have different effects on the brain to the ones that occur with ordinary.
Now the brain, a lot of this stuff is electrical, isn't it?
It's all electric.
It's all electrical. Well, that was close. And so, how do you follow electrical impulses?
Well, you try to measure the responses of neurons to all kinds of different stimuli.
But how do you observe them? Through MRIs or through?
MRIs mainly, CAT scans, all kinds of stuff like that.
Now, you are going to give a lecture sometime in the future about some of this stuff, aren't you, Jack?
Yes, I probably will.
Well, we understand.
And Ray is going to introduce you.
This is Jack.
I wonder if we could impose on your daughter to share with us something you think we should know about your dad.
Well, he's a great dad.
Yeah.
He's a very kind and loving dad. He was not the best math homework helper when I was a kid.
Oh, no.
Because math is not my strong suit. But he's very good at all kinds of other fatherly roles. And his work is fascinating. I've always been interested in understanding it better, but it is very complex. And it's,
I found out.
Yes, yes, it's very complex.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
How often did he beat you?
More questions? You have a question?
Never.
Right.
I got Parkinson's disease, and they have people going deep penetration with electrical, and it stimulates the brain. How does that affect future source of people to continue with this deep dish depth and see where it could go?
Well, it's a serious problem, and there isn't anything really spectacular about what the people have been doing on this problem. It'll take a long time, I'm afraid, to get somewhere with it.
And deep brain stimulation has been used on many different neurological problems.
Yeah.
I have essential tremor, and some people have tried it. I have a daughter who has Tourette syndrome, and some people have tried it.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of research in it, and I think we just need more research, and that comes from people trying it.
Yeah, I know it's.
I think the outcome from what I've learned over the years of really being interested in it have been inconclusive at this point. Some people get very good results, and some people get no results, and some people have negative results.
Yeah.
So the brain, it amazes me that you have spent basically a lifetime studying the brain, and there's still so much more to know. And how fortunate that the students that you've worked with and mentored are carrying on. Maybe in our lifetime we won't see those answers, but in our grandchildren's lifetimes we won't have the same challenges that we have now.
Well, there's a big difference between what things are like now and what they were like 25 years ago, for example. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's going to take a long time before we can solve all the things,
Well, like
a lot of the problems,
if
particularly this kind of problem.
if you go back maybe 40 years ago or so, people who were severely depressed had different options as to what they could do to their brain, and for some this was a lifesaver, but not for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
No.
oh, Trudy.
That one.
Jack, I'd like to know what you think. I've read recently a lot of interesting articles concerning Alzheimer's and how music stimulates the brain, and how it's used so often, kind of almost therapeutically, with patients. And I think that's always so interesting, and how, they might not communicate very well, yet if you sing a song, one of the old songs, they'll know all the words. And I think it's fantastically interesting how the brain works. And another question is, don't you think a lot of the research now, along with the study of the brain, involves genetics and gene therapy?
Yes, it does. It certainly does.
More questions? Some questions back here.
I was going to do it.
Well-
I thought there might be a little battery setting.
Oh, great.
There's been a lot of talk about first stages of dementia. I came in firsthand with that diagnosis from Loyola with my wife. And I've seen people that have been diagnosed with first stage of dementia. I guess it comes in different forms, but I had a brief skirmish with my son-in-law about her going into rehab, he wanted to put her into assisted living. And I told him that assisted living was not the way to go. That I felt that with my limited medical background, that coming home would be the best place for her. So we had a little short discussion on, of course, I won out that discussion. And we brought her home. That was 2.5 years ago. Today, she is somewhere in the 90% range of back to her old self.
Oh,
And I attribute that to being around her own belongings, seeing the things that she's familiar with, being talked to about the things that she asks questions about in her own home, her own clothing and everything, brought her back to 90%. And she's back to 90% of herself, even to the point where she gives me what for no reason at all. That's back to her normal self. So my thing is, what is your take on that?
Well, being with people that she trusts and is a big deal. It's a very big deal to be in an environment where you trust the other people there. And if you're not in an environment like that, then it's much more difficult to do. So you did the right thing. Absolutely did the right thing.
And I think you knew it, Willie. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm just a mathematician.
Well, we can't have it all. Some people have to be mathematicians. Any more questions? Oh, good.
First of all, Jack, I want to thank you so much. I've heard your story before. I was in awe of you. I still am. I was wondering what it was like growing up for you, the emotional part. Did you realize as a youngster that you had this gift?
Yes.
But how did you handle it? I mean, what did you realize that you were blessed with it? And
Well, let me put it this way. My mother was convinced that I was a genius.
That's right.
And she got very upset with me if I came back with a report where I got 98% instead of 100%. She gave me a very hard time any time that happened. So I was motivated to always get 100% when I was young. Later on, I realized that it was all a fake. I didn't need to do that all the time.
well, thank you so much.
But it turned out that in the end, she was right. My parents took me to a school that actually was 250 years old in Edinburgh, in Scotland. It was developed by one of the kings of Scotland before he became the King of England as well. James. And once I went to that school, it was amazing because every year I ended up the #1 student in my class. And so by the time I went to the university, I thought it was easy. But then I found that the University of in Edinburgh, things were a lot harder than I realized they were. And it took me a while to really get started again.
Thank you, Jack.
It wasn't until I went to London and got to know Dennis Gabor, who was from Hungary. He ended up with a Nobel Prize for his work on holograms. He was the inventor of holography and holograms. And he actually was the inventor of a lot of other things, which he also deserved the Nobel Prize for, but he never got them.
I have a question. Can you get more than one Nobel Prize?
Well, you can in principle, but it's very rare for that to happen.
Yes, because you just mentioned that he did some other things that were of that quality.
Well, that happens a lot.
Oh, I can just see, you hear these Hollywood stars, and they have all these trophies along the way, and I'm wondering if these scientists have, built cabinets for all their Nobel Prizes. It's rare.
Well, I had Julian and I ended up going to spend time in Germany, in Göttingen, which is the center for German science and has been for hundreds of years. And in Göttingen, I got to know one of the people there, and he turned out to be a real mentor for me. He got a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and he gave half the Nobel Prize to the Weizmann Institute in Israel. He was embarrassed by what Hitler had done to Jews.
And he was flying. He was a flyer.
Yeah.
He was a bomber.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
But he never saw action.
He was 17.
And when the war ended, he was in an American POW, but he walked out one day. They let him out, and he walked 600 miles back to Göttingen, which was is the center of German science, and he ended up with the Nobel Prize for his work in chemistry. And he was one of my my long-term mentors. Half of his Nobel Prize he gave to the Weizmann Institute.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful. Any other questions? Well, I don't even know how to say thank you because this is above and beyond.
Yes.
You have shared with us an amazing life that we could only maybe dream of, or not even know enough to dream of it.
Well, I was very lucky.
Well, you took the luck and you made a wonderful life, and we thank you very much for sharing.